Her daughter-in-law erased her from the Thanksgiving table with a name card and a whisper. Elaine Ward, widow and quiet matriarch, didn't protest. Jessica poured wine, posed for photos, and called her furniture. By Christmas, the house would be sold, the deed reassigned, and their key no longer fit the front door. Elaine had spent decades holding the family together. Now she was folding them out, and when they tried to reclaim what never belonged to them, the title would speak louder than blood. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The scent of roasted turkey clung to the walls like tradition. Warmth buzzed through the house. Elaine's house, where every Thanksgiving had ever been held. The silver had been polished last week. The dining table, her husband's pride, had been oiled just yesterday. But this year she wasn't asked to carve the roast, or even slice the pie. She stood at the threshold between the kitchen and the dining room, her fingers still damp from wiping down the final clean glass. Jessica stood at the head of the long table, perfectly manicured hands adjusting place cards like a wedding planner, with a superiority complex. She wore one of those blouses that looked expensive and said nothing. The table shimmered with Pinterest-level detail. Taper candles, little gold pumpkins, hand-lettered name tags. Everyone had a seat. Except Elaine. She blinked, steady and silent, at the end of the table where a place setting had always been laid out for her since the year her youngest brother returned from Vietnam. There was no plate, no utensils, no folded napkin with her name inked in cursive. Just a gap. A visual erasure. Jessica leaned toward Ruby, who was arranging forks a bit too precisely for a teenager. Her voice was pitched low, but not low enough. "Don't plate her food," Jessica whispered. "She's not family, she's furniture." Ruby froze, mid-reach, a fork dangling in her hand. The blood drained from her face as she risked a glance toward Elaine, their eyes locked. Elaine smiled. Not warmly, not coldly, just enough to register receipt. Then, without a word, she turned and walked to the living room. Her joints ached as she lowered herself into the armchair her late husband used to nap in, the leather seat creaking in protest. The room hummed faintly with laughter and voices from the dining area, but she wasn't listening to any of it. She was staring at the photograph above the mantel, one from 1983, a full table, everyone smiling, her in the center, her husband's arm draped behind her shoulders like she mattered. This year, she wasn't even asked to bless the meal. From her seat, she watched Tyler walk into the room to grab a second bottle of wine from the side cabinet. His eyes landed on her. He opened his mouth like he might say something, but he didn't. He turned away, twisting the corkscrew without meeting her gaze. Ruby appeared next, awkwardly holding a dish of sweet potatoes. She hesitated, standing half in the kitchen, half in the hallway, caught between duty and conscience. Elaine caught her eye again, and offered a small nod, permission to do nothing. Ruby looked like she wanted to cry. "Dinner's ready." Jessica's voice chimed like a bell. No one asked to ring. Everyone to the table. Everyone but her. Elaine leaned back in the armchair. The room grew quieter, the deeper into the evening it slipped. She heard silverware clink against porcelain, the soft sounds of wine being poured, the murmur of stories that didn't include her name. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed at a joke she hadn't told. The house she'd built was now someone else's theater, and she'd been written out of the scene. She folded her hands in her lap, smoothing the skin over knuckles gone stiff with time and labor. The smell of gravy drifted in from the dining room. No one asked if she was hungry. The front door creaked slightly with the night breeze, a reminder that this house, no matter who filled it now, still stood on her deed. Her late husband's voice echoed in her memory. "If they forget who owns it, remind them." Elaine's gaze drifted to the corner of the room where a faded box sat partially tucked under a chair. Inside, she knew, were documents no one had bothered to ask about, a will, a property deed, decades of receipts, records, and her name. Always her name, in bold on every page. She slowly reached for the box and pulled it closer. A candle flickered out in the dining room, casting a brief shadow across Jessica's Instagram-perfect tablescape. Elaine didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on the name on the deed, Elaine M. Ward, sole owner. Her smile returned quieter this time, but real. The hum of the dinner carried on behind her, oblivious. But from across the street, Viola Jenkins sat in her window, a teacup in hand, watching through the gauzy curtains, and she saw everything. The silence the morning after Thanksgiving was deliberate. It wrapped around Elaine like a thick wool coat, heavy, scratchy, and impossible to ignore. Outside, the last amber leaves clung stubbornly to the maple tree out front, shivering under a crisp Carolina wind. Inside, the house felt still in a way that wasn't restful. It felt emptied, like something sacred had been extracted. She stood in the small office Harold used to call her war room, though she'd never seen herself as combative until recently. The space was modest, just a walnut desk, an aging filing cabinet, and a window that faced the front yard, where footprints from yesterday's guests still bruised the grass. Elaine opened the bottom drawer. Inside, everything remained in the same exact order she'd left it in the spring. Tax documents bundled by year, envelopes labeled in her husband's steady print, and a manila folder with a single paper clip holding the edges like a clasped jaw. She pulled it out and walked it over to the desk. With both hands, she laid the folder flat and opened it. The top page carried the weight of decades. Property title, 112 Green Hollow Drive. Her fingers moved over the familiar details like someone reacquainting themselves with an old diary. Owner of record, Elaine Marie Ward. Encumbrances, none. Liens, none. Co-signers, none. There was no trick clause, no shared ownership, no contingency. Just her. Only her. The foundation beneath every holiday, every birthday, every casserole that had ever graced that kitchen table, all of it had always rested on her name, even if no one had spoken it out loud yesterday. She sat back, letting her hand rest on the folder as her gaze drifted to the corner of the drawer. A yellowed envelope, sealed but never closed, peeked out from beneath an insurance form. Her breath caught the way it always did when Harold's handwriting appeared. Blocky, upright, and unmistakable. She slid the envelope free and unfolded the single sheet inside. If they forget who owns it, remind them. No love, Harold. No sentimentality, just instruction. She folded it once, then again, and slipped it into her sweater pocket like a kept promise. Through the front window, voices rose in volume. Elaine pushed aside the curtain and watched Jessica on the porch, pacing with a garland of fake pine slung over one arm. A metal tripod leaned against the railing. Tyler stood awkwardly near the door, holding a steaming mug, as Ruby carried out a tray of cookies. Jessica moved them like set pieces on a stage, directing everyone with clipped efficiency. She adjusted a scarf around her neck, stepped back, and checked her phone camera. Elaine wasn't invited outside, not even asked to take the photo. It wasn't that they didn't notice her. It was that they didn't care if she did. Across the street, in her usual perch by the window, Viola Jenkins sipped from her chipped teacup and stared with open disdain at the tableau. Her mouth moved, barely audible, even to herself. Photo staging for liars. Elaine turned from the window and moved to her desk. Her laptop was already open from the morning before. She clicked into her email and typed without hesitation. Subject: private consultation to Richard Klein Body. This week, discretion required. You know why. EW. She hit send. The message disappeared, but the relief didn't come. Not yet. In the kitchen, Jessica's voice rang out again, sharper this time, directing Rube to move just a little left, so the porch lantern caught her hair. Elaine opened the cabinet above her desk and pulled out a fresh file folder. The label strip was blank. She stared at it for a few seconds before writing transition. Her pen dragged slightly on the last "in," but she didn't stop. Slowly she began sliding documents inside: the deed, the insurance paperwork, and a printout of the email she'd just sent to Richard. Later that evening, after the lights on the porch had been unplugged and the leftover cookies abandoned on the counter, Elaine sat on the edge of her bed and checked her phone. One message. Ruby, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. Elaine read it twice. She didn't reply. Instead, she placed the phone face down, stood and returned to the office one last time before bed. She sealed the manila folder, clipped it closed, and placed it directly in the center of the desk. Then she opened the top drawer, removed a crisp white envelope, and in thick black pen, wrote 2 words across the front. To Richard. The scent of cinnamon-scented cleaner still lingered in the kitchen, left over from Jessica's frantic touch-ups the day before. It mingled now with the soft murmur of the dishwasher and the artificial calm of a home trying to return to normal, though normal for Elaine had long since vanished. She sat at the breakfast table in a robe she'd owned for years, its hem fraying slightly at the cuffs. A half-drunk cup of black coffee cooled beside her, untouched for the last 20 minutes. Her laptop was open in front of her, but she wasn't working. She was staring. On the screen glowed an Instagram post with that familiar smugness only Jessica could craft without a shred of irony. The caption read, "Hosting is exhausting, but so worth it #our home #blessed and tired #family tradition." The photo beneath it showed Jessica at the front door, one hand on her hip, the other holding a pie Ruby had made. Tyler stood beside her looking confused about where to look. The house behind them, Elaine's house, was the real star. Warm light poured out of the windows, the wreath glowed golden, and from a distance it looked like joy had moved in permanently. Elaine's face wasn't in the frame, neither was her name. She took a breath through her nose and clicked save. Then she printed the post, trimmed the paper's edge with slow precision, and slid it into the file labeled transition. The sound of the folder closing felt louder than it should have. A knock came at the door, firm, measured, and deliberate. She didn't jump. She already knew who it would be. When she opened it, Richard Klein stood on her front porch in jeans, a navy windbreaker, and a baseball cap that barely concealed his salt and pepper hair. He carried nothing except a discreet leather binder tucked under one arm. To anyone watching, and someone always was, he looked like a family friend stopping by for a post-holiday check-in. "Afternoon, Elaine," he said, his tone warm but business-ready. She stepped aside to let him in, motioning silently toward the living room. No hugs, no tea, just clarity. Richard didn't waste time with small talk. Once inside, he scanned the room with a realtor's eyes, noting the refinished hardwood, the crown-molding Harold had installed himself, and the lack of any forced aesthetic fluff. He nodded once approvingly. They moved from room to room, kitchen, den, the formal dining room, where a few autumn place settings still lingered. Jessica hadn't bothered to clean everything yet. A wine glass with coral lipstick sat alone on the buffet. "You could stage it," Richard murmured, stepping into the dining room and running a finger lightly along the edge of the chair rail. "Bring in a design crew, set the illusion. But with this layout, these bones, we're talking 600K easy. More honestly, if we really dress it up." Elaine shook her head before he could continue. Her voice was even without apology. "Let's not stage it. Let's show it raw. Let them see what it is." Richard studied her for a moment. She met his gaze without flinching. After a pause, he gave a short, approving nod. "Raw it is." They moved toward the hallway. As they passed the staircase, light footsteps echoed down from above. Ruby. She was in oversized sweatpants and a faded university hoodie that had once belonged to Tyler. Her hair was in a messy bun, and her face looked slightly puffy, like she hadn't slept well. When she saw Richard, she paused, but then looked past him, straight at Elaine. In a second that felt longer than it was, she crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's shoulders. Elaine didn't expect it. For a moment she didn't even lift her arms. But then she did, slowly, carefully. And when she rested her hand on the back of Ruby's head, her fingers trembled just enough to be noticed. No words passed between them. None were needed. Richard, now by the entryway, cleared his throat and tapped his binder once. "I'll draw up the paperwork," he said, "and I'll keep it quiet." Elaine gave him a tight nod. "Quiet matters." He turned to leave, but before he opened the front door, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, squinted, and gave a dry chuckle. "You'll love this," he said, holding up the screen to show Elaine. It was Jessica's Instagram post. The same one Elaine had printed. Half the neighborhood's reposting it to their stories, Richard said, amused. Looks like they really think it's theirs. Elaine didn't blink. She just stepped forward, gently took the door handle from him, and held it open. Let them, she said, for now. Sunday morning arrived in its quiet, polished way, sunlight dripping through the window panes, warming the floorboards where a few dead pine needles still clung from the Thanksgiving garland. Elaine stood just inside the hallway arch, watching Jessica rearrange the dining room table for the third time that morning. The table, the same mahogany one Harold had chosen at auction 40 years ago, had been cleared and redressed with new decor. Metallic chargers, white taper candles swapped for gold, and tiny frosted pine cones arranged with militant precision. Jessica crouched slightly, angling her phone just so, then stood back and frowned. No, the runner's wrong, she muttered to herself, pulling at the corner of a snowflake-patterned cloth until it shifted half an inch. She tapped a few times on her phone, then stepped to the other side of the table, squinting at her screen. Okay, now it reads. Elaine remained still, arms crossed loosely over her cardigan. It wasn't just the decor Jessica was curating, it was the narrative. The camera never tilted up far enough to show the beams Harold had installed himself, or the slightly uneven molding where Elaine had repainted by hand after the roof repair. Those details were too human, too real, too hers. And in Jessica's world, the house only mattered if it photographed well. Elaine turned away. The office door clicked softly behind her as she entered. Sunlight illuminated the desk in a narrow band, pooling over the papers she had laid out the night before. The folder labeled Transition sat open, its contents growing day by day: deed, insurance, Richard's preliminary assessment notes, and now something older. She pulled out the will and trust documents from the fireproof box in the lower drawer. Paper edges slightly yellowed, but still crisp. Her name appeared again and again: trustee, primary beneficiary, sole executor. Her hand hovered over one document, then she gently set it down and reached instead for the envelope Richard had left last night. Inside was the waiver, an agreement to forego professional staging. Elaine read it twice, then signed with a calm that bordered on surgical. A note in Richard's handwriting was paper-clipped to the top. This sells itself. No fluff needed. Just say the word. She picked up her phone and typed a reply. Received and signed. Make sure they don't see it until the offer's final. Then she hit send, her finger lingering a second longer on the screen than necessary. The sound of footsteps made her glance up. Tyler stood in the doorway, awkward and unshaven, holding a coffee mug that bore the logo of his old college. He looked like a man who had practiced his next sentence, and still wasn't sure how it would land. Jessica said, "You've been distant lately," he offered. It wasn't confrontational, just the limp diplomacy of someone hoping to smooth things over without ever naming the real issue. Elaine closed the folder without looking up. "I suppose I have," she said. "Distance offers perspective." Tyler cleared his throat, half smiled. "She just wants to know what's going on. You've been busy." Elaine finally met his eyes. Her voice was steady, stripped of heat. "Tell her the dining room is under contract." Tyler blinked. "Wait, what does that mean?" Elaine stood, file in hand. "Exactly what it sounds like." For a moment he looked like a child caught in the middle of a conversation between adults he couldn't keep up with. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Then quietly he stepped back, murmuring, "I'll let her know." The office door closed again. Elaine exhaled once, slowly, and placed the signed staging waiver into the file. Across the street, Viola sat at her kitchen table with a crossword in one hand and her binoculars in the other. From her view she could see Jessica returning to the dining room table and sitting down, not to eat, but to scroll. She watched Jessica's face as the screen lit up with a new email alert. The sound came not from the door, but from the air, Jessica's voice slicing through the house like a knife thrown blindly but with purpose. Elaine had just finished steeping her tea. Chamomile, no sugar. She set the spoon down carefully on a folded napkin, turned off the burner and waited. Jessica's heels struck the hardwood in rapid succession, sharp, irritated steps that knew the way to the kitchen without needing to ask permission. She rounded the corner like a storm in search of something to destroy, and held up her phone like a smoking gun. "Is this a joke?" she snapped. "Tell me this is a mistake." Elaine looked at the screen. A group text thread glowed at full brightness, the latest message circled in red. Monica G. Saw the Zillow preview. "Are you guys moving? Looks like your house is pending, congrats." Elaine took a slow sip of tea. Jessica blinked, stunned by the audacity of the silence. "Elaine," she repeated, her voice thinner now. "What the hell is this?" Elaine set the cup down with deliberate care. "It's a retirement plan." Jessica shook her head, half laughing, half incredulous. "You listed the house?" Elaine met her eyes. "I sold it." The color drained from Jessica's face like a stain dissolving in bleach. "You what?" "It's under contract. Inspection already passed. Final paperwork in motion." Elaine paused. "You'll need to be out before the 18th. From the hallway, Tyler's voice called uncertainly, "What's going on?" Jessica turned just as he appeared, still in yesterday's jeans and a t-shirt that clung to his frame like he'd slept in it. "She sold the house, Tyler," Jessica hissed, "without even telling us." Elaine turned toward the window. The sunlight poured in unbothered, landing on the floor like everything was exactly as it should be. Elaine. Tyler stepped forward now, palms open, voice cracking under the pressure. "Please, don't do this." "Where will we go?" "Ruby has school. I just started the new job. Jessica's parents' place is too far." "You should have asked that," Elaine said before deciding I didn't belong here. Jessica's mouth opened, but no words came out. Elaine's expression didn't shift. "You've had years to make this house feel like family. Instead, you turned it into a set piece." Tyler looked between them like a man suddenly realizing the floor plan of his life had changed, and no one had given him a map. "There has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Can we talk about this?" "We are," Elaine said. "You're talking, I'm done." Across the street, as if summoned by timing alone, Viola Jenkins stood on her porch in a thick cardigan, arms folded across her chest. She raised one hand and gave Elaine a slow, deliberate wave. Elaine nodded once in return. Jessica caught the motion through the window. "Oh, perfect," she snapped. "Of course she's involved. I bet you two have been planning this." Elaine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jessica's rage wasn't seeking truth. It was seeking control, and control had just left the building. The kettle let out a soft hiss behind her. Elaine poured what was left of the water into her cup, added a slice of lemon and stirred without looking back. "You can't do this without us," Jessica said, desperate now. "You can't just pull the rug out like this." Elaine turned to face her one last time. "You pulled it yourself," she said softly. "The night you told my granddaughter I was furniture." Jessica blinked, her face betraying the tiniest flicker of memory, of recognition, of consequence. Tyler moved as if to speak again, but Elaine turned away. The conversation, like the contract, was closed. The next 3 days passed not like time, but like consequences unfolding. On Thursday morning, the legal notification arrived, not through whispers, not through suspicion, but through certified email. The subject line was impossible to misread. "Final executed agreement. 30-day vacate clause attached." Elaine was in the sunroom when it came through, folding winter scarves into a shallow cardboard box lined with lavender paper. She hadn't packed anything belonging to Jessica or Tyler. She didn't need to. Nothing in this house belonged to them, not by deed, not by legacy, and certainly not by grace. Upstairs, the inbox alert chimed on the family desktop. Jessica opened the message while half-dressed in a rushed attempt at normalcy, her coffee still cold in the mug she hadn't touched. She stared at the screen as if reading a foreign language, but the language was English. Legal, clear, 30 days to vacate, no tenant rights, no cosigner privileges. Her scream was short, raw, and sharp enough to send a flock of birds scattering from the power line just outside the bedroom window. Downstairs, Elaine placed a layer of newspaper over a framed photo of Ruby as a toddler sitting in Harold's lap. She tucked it gently into the box, then pulled the tape gun across the seam with slow, deliberate pressure. A soft knock came at the doorframe behind her. Ruby stood there, eyes uncertain but steady. "I heard," she said quietly. Elaine looked up. She didn't ask how. Some things traveled on currents deeper than Wi-Fi. "I can help pack," Ruby offered. Elaine looked at her, really looked, not at the sweatshirt she wore, or the circles under her eyes from sleepless nights caught between adults at war. She looked at the loyalty Ruby wore like armor, the kind that didn't waver under pressure, the kind that came from memory. "You sure?" Elaine asked softly. Ruby nodded once. "I don't want to be in any pictures anymore." Elaine gestured toward the open box beside her. Ruby stepped forward without hesitation. By noon, the rhythm of cardboard tape and quiet cooperation filled the sunroom. Elaine handed Ruby a jewelry box to wrap. Ruby paused, then opened it without asking. Inside lay a silver locket, modest, oval-shaped, with a faint etching of violets on the back. Inside, 2 photos, a much younger Elaine and a newborn swaddled in pink. "Your mother said I shouldn't give it to you," Elaine said, not looking up. Ruby looked down at the locket, then up at her grandmother. "She doesn't get to decide what I remember." Elaine smiled gently and took Ruby's hand, folding the locket into her palm. "You always remembered me," she said. Upstairs, Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear, listening to the buyer's attorney explain it all again. That yes, the documents were final. That yes, Elaine had every legal right. That no, there were no clauses for reversal, unless fraud could be proven, and nothing about Jessica's Instagram photos or place settings counted as ownership. Tyler stood nearby, holding the printout in both hands like it might physically change if he stared hard enough. He looked down at the bold text, possession date December 18th, time 12 p.m. Jessica's voice cracked across the room. "She's giving it to strangers. She's reclaiming what was never yours," Tyler said, more to himself than to her. Later that evening, Elaine walked through the dining room, for what might have been the 1000th time. The chairs were empty now, lined against the wall. Jessica had tried to claim one of them earlier, claiming it was a wedding gift. Elaine said nothing, just removed the chair, wrapped it in a mover's blanket, and tagged it with her own name. From the front window, Viola gave a low whistle of approval as the moving truck idled at the curb. On Monday morning, Elaine found a folded card tucked into her mailbox. No envelope, no return name, just a hand-drawn rose in blue ink, and 5 words written with care. "Good for you. About time." She turned it over, blank on the back. No signature, but she didn't need one. She recognized the slanted G. It was from Laverne, who lived 3 houses down, the one who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to Elaine in 4 years. And now those 10 had finally been chosen. Inside the house, empty boxes sat like quiet witnesses in every room. The mantel was bare, the guest linens boxed, the upstairs hallway echoing. Elaine moved through the spaces deliberately, clipboard in hand, ticking through a list she'd kept in pencil for decades, but had never expected to act on. At 2 p.m., Viola arrived in a pea-green coat, a tin of lemon cookies, balanced on her palm like an offering. She didn't knock, just pushed open the back door and whistled as she stepped in. "I hosted a little something," she announced. "Figured you might be ready to clink a glass or 2. Elaine raised an eyebrow. Viola reached into her oversized purse and pulled out 2 china teacups wrapped in tissue paper, then a thermos that steamed slightly when she unscrewed the cap. "Spiced tea, with a heavy splash of retirement spirit." Elaine cracked a smile. "You always know the ratio." They sat at the kitchen table, 1 chair missing, 2 boxes stacked in its place, and raised their cups in a toast neither of them bothered to put into words. Down the street, Jessica posted a carefully filtered photo of the front door, captioned with aching subtlety. "Sometimes the place you call home doesn't return the favor. Prayers appreciated during this sudden change. Faith in the storm. Family. First, It garnered the usual hearts. A few sending love comments, one invitation to stay at someone's lake cabin for a weekend, but nothing practical, nothing that offered a solution. Just digital pity that faded under the next brunch reel. Elaine didn't follow Jessica's account, but Ruby did, and that evening as they folded the last of the winter coats into garment bags, she showed her grandmother the screen. Elaine read without reaction, then handed the phone back. "She's performing again," Ruby muttered. Elaine walked to the corner of the room, opened the hall closet and pulled out a small box labeled candles, holiday. She set it on the floor, then turned and looked at Ruby with a question instead of a reprimand. Ruby scrolled through the comments one more time, her voice quieter now. "They're calling you cold." Elaine bent down to zip the garment bag. "Cold doesn't break." Ruby crossed her arms. "I call you clear." Elaine paused. Her fingers stopped mid-motion. Then she stood. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. Her hand reached for Ruby's shoulder and stayed there, light but firm. In the front yard, Tyler stood near the edge of the sidewalk, holding his phone like it might answer the question forming in his throat. When he came back inside, his steps were slower than they had been days earlier. "We could talk to her," he said to Jessica, who was staring out the living room window like she could will the house back into their control. "Just see if she'd delay closing. A month. A couple weeks. Long enough to figure something out." Jessica didn't answer. Not right away. But when she turned to face him, her expression was hollowed out with the realization that influence was no longer a currency she could spend. Elaine was already ahead of them. By midweek she'd booked the storage company, confirmed the movers, arranged itemized pickup for every box labeled to keep. The items marked legacy would be going to Savannah. The rest, well, she'd learned long ago that not everything needed to be carried into the next chapter. The house was quieter now, not empty, not abandoned, but hushed, like it knew its time was up. The kitchen still smelled faintly of sage and butter from the stuffing Jessica had made a week ago, but the warmth that usually lingered after the holidays had vanished, replaced by the dry, hollow scent of cardboard and wood polish. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt more pronounced, like it too was bracing for departure. Elaine stood at the kitchen island, watching the cursor blink on her laptop as a new message from Richard came through. Subject: Early close approved body. Buyer wants keys by Friday. Funds will wire same day. Let me know if you want to proceed. She didn't hesitate. Just replied, "Proceed." She closed the laptop and turned toward the pantry where the final boxes sat ready to go, labeled, sealed, and marked in her neat block handwriting. Legacy. Donation. Savannah. Friday came sooner than anyone expected. At 9:05 a.m., a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Richard stepped out with a folder in one hand and a heavy brass keychain in the other. He wore no tie this time, just a dark wool coat, sleeves slightly frayed at the cuffs. It suited the moment, unpolished, final, clean. Elaine opened the door before he could knock. "You ready?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I've been ready." They walked the property one last time. Kitchen, garage, garden, porch swing, then the living room, where a single beam of winter light fell across the hardwood like a slow farewell. At 10:12, Elaine handed over the keys. The exchange was unceremonious. No ribbon, no hugs, no photographs, just the quiet dignity of a woman reclaiming power the world forgot she held. Jessica arrived 20 minutes too late. She stormed through the front door, still clutching a travel mug and phone, the screen mid-scroll. Her boots clicked angrily against the tile as she moved through the living room like she still belonged there. "Where is he?" she barked. "Richard. I just need to." Her words dropped away as she turned the corner toward the dining room and stopped. The door was shut, more than that, locked. She reached for the knob, pulled. Nothing. She stepped back, stunned, as if the house had physically rejected her. Elaine appeared behind her, calm and unhurried. She set her purse down by the door. "That room's not yours anymore," she said simply. Jessica turned, cheeks flushed with confusion and heat. What does that mean? Elaine didn't raise her voice. It means you don't stage where you're not welcome. Then she walked past her and opened the front door. The cold air poured in without apology. By noon, the funds hit her account. 7 figures. Clean. Final. Elaine didn't smile. She didn't gasp. She just looked at the confirmation screen, then quietly closed the banking app like she was putting a finished book back on a shelf. Ruby found her shortly after, standing in the garage with her hands resting on a half-packed crate of garden tools. "So, it's done?" she asked. Elaine nodded once. "It's done." Ruby stepped closer, hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. "Where will you go now?" Elaine turned, the early afternoon sun brushing her face through the open garage door. Her voice was steady, almost soft. "Someplace warm. Someplace nobody thinks I owe them a seat at the table." The sun hadn't yet cleared the rooftops when Ruby found her mother in the guest bedroom, sitting on a half-unzipped suitcase, like it might somehow reorganize itself. Jessica's hair was pinned sloppily, one earring in, one forgotten. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, but she didn't check it. She just stared into the suitcase like it contained a life she hadn't prepared to pack. Ruby stood in the doorway, her fingers curled tightly around the frame. "I heard you," she said. Jessica didn't move. "What?" "That night," Ruby said. "Thanksgiving. In the dining room. You told me not to plate her food because she wasn't family, that she was furniture." Jessica blinked, slowly, as if the words had taken longer to land than they should have. "You were tired. You misheard." "I didn't." Jessica's posture straightened, less maternal, more calculated. "You don't understand family hierarchy, Ruby. You're 17. You don't get the weight of tradition or how things work." Ruby stepped forward now. Not rushed, not angry, just awake in a way she hadn't been in weeks. "She built the house," she said softly. "You rented the throne." Jessica's mouth opened, but the rebuttal never came. It hovered shapeless between them. Ruby walked out before she could fill it. Downstairs, Elaine stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out the last mug before placing it gently in the donation bin. Ruby entered silently and opened a velvet box she'd brought from her room, unmarked, unassuming, until she placed it on the table. Elaine looked over. Her expression softened. "I was going to wait," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "But I think you already answered the question." She crossed the room, opened a nearby drawer, and pulled out a smaller box, this one square and heavier. When she opened it, 2 rings caught the light, a diamond set in gold, and a thinner wedding band pressed against its side, like a promise never broken. "These were mine," Elaine said. "And before that my mother's. I never gave them to your father because," she paused, just long enough, "because I knew he wouldn't choose well." Ruby didn't speak, she just nodded, once, and held out her hand. Elaine placed the box in her palm. "For your real future, when the time's right." The silence that followed was reverent, but not heavy. Something had shifted, not just between them, but around them, as if the house itself knew where the next legacy was heading. That afternoon Tyler came by, alone. No Jessica, no arguments, just a man with shadows under his eyes and keys in his pocket that no longer unlocked anything that mattered. Elaine met him at the side door. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said quickly. "I know what I let happen." Elaine studied him. The same boy who once brought her dandelions from the backyard and called them sunflowers. Now grayer, slower. Still hers, but farther than he'd ever been. "I should have stopped it," he said, eyes down. "I should have said something sooner. But Jess, she doesn't listen. Not to me." Elaine didn't offer comfort, only silence. Not cruel, but final. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he added, "but I hope you'll remember that I was raised better than this. Even if I forgot." She looked at him a moment longer. Then, gently she reached out and touched his shoulder. "Go take care of your daughter," she said. "She's the only one who didn't forget." Across the street, Viola approached the mailbox with her usual afternoon pace, envelope in hand. But instead of slipping it into her own slot, She crossed the lawn and walked straight up to the door where Jessica now stood behind drawn curtains. She knocked once, then held up a manila folder with a glossy flyer tucked inside. The bold heading read, "Sold, 112 Green Hollow Drive. New ownership. Finalized. No contingencies." Jessica didn't open the door. Viola slid it through the mail slot anyway. The sea didn't ask anything of her. That was the first thing Elaine noticed about the beach rental. Its stillness wasn't something she had to earn. It welcomed her as she was. No performance required. No approval withheld. The small coastal cottage, nestled behind a wind-worn fence, and flanked by two quiet neighbors, had whitewashed shutters, a wraparound porch, and a view of the water that didn't care about anyone's opinion. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't curated, but it was hers, for now, and it felt like breathing for the first time in years. Inside, the furniture was simple. A slip-covered couch that smelled faintly of lemon oil, a pinewood table that seated four, and windows that opened wide enough to carry the sound of the tide straight into her morning coffee. She no longer walked through hallways on edge, wondering what silence might explode into next. There were no name cards, no Instagram poses, just a steady, clean quiet that made room for thought. Elaine spent her mornings with books and hot tea, and her evenings listening to classical radio on low volume, the strings and piano gently weaving through the rhythm of crashing waves. The place was already half furnished, so she brought only what mattered: a photo of Harold in his army uniform, a quilt Ruby had stitched in home EC, the locket now missing from her own jewelry box, and a folder marked "Next Chapter" that sat unopened in a drawer for now. Ruby called almost every night, not out of obligation but something gentler, more consistent. She FaceTimed from her bedroom, where a map of colleges had replaced a vanity mirror, and laundry piled behind her like normal teenage chaos. Her face looked clearer these days, less guarded, less cautious, and when she smiled it reached her eyes. "I think about it sometimes," Ruby said one evening, stretching out on her bed with her hair tied back, "how it all happened so fast. It still feels like a movie no one believed was real." Elaine nodded from across the screen, holding her cup in both hands. It was real. That's the hardest part. People think real things happen with loud endings, but sometimes the truth just moves in quietly and changes everything. Ruby looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You seem lighter." Elaine smiled, the kind that crept up from memory. "I am. I think the weight was never mine to carry, and I finally figured out how to set it down." They didn't have to talk about Jessica, or Tyler, or what was said and not said. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It had shape, it had meaning, and it didn't need filling. But Jessica tried. The call came mid-morning, an unknown number with a local area code. Elaine's phone buzzed on the side table. She watched it, let it ring, then listened to the voicemail later with the detached calm of someone reading a headline about a town they no longer lived in. Jessica's voice had the forced softness of someone performing grace without ever learning the steps. "I just thought maybe you'd want to talk," she said. "We're not where we thought we'd be. It's been hard, really hard." There was a pause. A long one. Then, "Anyway, just thought I'd reach out." Elaine deleted the message before it finished playing. Later that day she received an email from Tyler. No greeting. Just a quiet line of lowercase honesty. "We're behind on rent. If there's any way you could, even just a short loan, anything would help." Elaine read it twice. Her hand didn't tremble. Her breath didn't catch. She opened a reply window, typed one word, "Understood," then hit send and shut the laptop. That evening Richard called. Not with pressure, just an offer. "I've found a place," he said, his voice easy from condo in Savannah, 3rd floor, corner unit, great light, gated entry, all the peace, none of the baggage. Elaine stood by the open screen door, watching the moon rise over the sea. "I think I'd like that," she said. "You deserve it," Richard replied. "I'll send over the photos." She didn't rush to look. Instead she stepped onto the porch, wrapped herself in a throw blanket, and listened to the ocean whisper against the sand. No doors slamming, No names spoken in anger, just wind, water, and the sound of something ending clear. The envelope came on a Tuesday, thick and hand-addressed, with a return address Elaine already knew by heart. She set it down on the table next to her tea and stared at it for a moment before opening it, slowly, carefully, like something sacred. The return address was Ruby's, scribbled in blocky blue ink. Inside, nestled between a folded letter and a transcript copy, was a college admissions essay, printed single-spaced in 12-point font on standard white paper. Elaine adjusted her reading glasses and settled into the armchair by the window, where the coastal light came in soft and low the way winter sun always did near the water. At the top of the page, centered and underlined, was the title, Inheritance Isn't Always Money. She began to read. The essay was honest, not polished, not performative, just raw and written like Ruby had peeled open her chest and poured it directly onto the page. It wasn't about the scholarships or the grades or the extracurriculars. It was about legacy, and the weight of silence and the difference between being raised and being seen. The woman who taught me the difference between fear and clarity never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her strength lived in the quiet places, in the way she poured tea or taped a box shut without explaining what was inside. People called her cold. I call her honest. I call her safe. I call her mine. By the time Elaine reached the final paragraph, the steam had long faded from her cup, and her hands were still. She folded the paper back with precision, then reached into the drawer beside her chair. From it she pulled a sealed envelope already addressed to Ruby, one she'd been holding back until the moment felt right. Inside was a simple notarized document, transferring ownership of 2 long-held savings bonds into Ruby's name, along with a letter that didn't try to explain the gesture. It simply said, "For the life you'll build without apology. Love, Grandma." She sealed the envelope, pressed the flap closed, and walked it down to the mailbox herself. No hesitation, no drama, just a quiet transaction between one generation and the next. The following week, Elaine was folding fresh linens when her phone buzzed with a message from Ruby. "Ruby, you never stop teaching me." Elaine read the words twice, then smiled, small and full. No reply necessary. Lesson received. 2 days later, in a different zip code and a rented apartment with scuffed baseboards, Jessica saw the post that shifted her world again. A congratulatory tag from the State Scholars Program. Ruby had won. Full tuition, essay published on their official site. Recognition and validation wrapped in public praise, praise that didn't include Jessica's name once. Jessica's fingers tightened around her phone. The screen blurred as she scrolled through the dozens of comments, many from neighbors, teachers, even people she'd once tried to impress. Not one of them mentioned her. Only Ruby, and sometimes Elaine. The next envelope to arrive came in cream linen paper, addressed in a looping hand Elaine didn't recognize at first. It was from the family who'd purchased the house. "Dear Mrs. Ward, we wanted to thank you for allowing your home to become ours. We can feel the history here, the stories, the care, the presence. We kept the dining room as it was. We've already hosted 3 dinners. The table still feels full, even when there's only 4 of us. You made something real here. We promise to take care of it." Elaine sat for a long time after reading it, the letter resting in her lap like an artifact. That evening her landline rang, an unexpected sound now. She answered, already guessing the voice on the other end. Elaine Vedfultza said, crisp as ever, "Guess where I just came from." Elaine smiled into the receiver. "Tell me. The new folks invited me to dinner. Can you believe it? Sat me right at the head of the table. Said they wanted to honor the way you used to do it." Elaine blinked slowly, letting the words settle. That dining room. Vedfultali letting the words settle. Full of respect this time. The email was brief. No subject line. No flourish. From Richard Klein to Elaine Ward message. They accepted the offer. Final walkthrough scheduled. You still ready? Elaine didn't overthink her reply. She didn't let her fingers hover above the keys or rehearse her tone. She simply typed yes, and finished. Then she clicked send and leaned back in her chair, letting the words settle into her chest like punctuation after a long, winding sentence. The condo was in Savannah, nestled in a quiet tree-lined neighborhood, where the sidewalks curved with age and the Spanish moss hung from the oaks like whispers that had nothing left to prove. Richard had sent her photos, a modest third-floor corner unit with tall windows, whitewashed walls and a small balcony that overlooked a courtyard garden. No open floor plan. Every room had its own door. She liked that. The purchase was clean. No cosigners. No waiting on family approval. No second opinions. Elaine signed the paperwork with steady hands and wired the funds without ceremony. The deed arrived 3 days later, printed on heavyweight linen paper, and folded neatly into a gold-sealed folder. Her name sat at the center of the page, unshared, unchallenged. Elaine Marie Ward, sole owner. The same name that had been quietly removed from table settings now gleamed, unedited, across state lines. Spring came early in Savannah. By mid-March, the courtyard jasmine had begun to bloom. Elaine moved in with 6 labeled boxes, 3 suitcases and 1 framed photo wrapped in a quilt Ruby had made years ago. The moving company offered to unpack for her. She declined. Some things are best arranged by the person who's lived them. That first night she slept with the windows open, letting the scent of salt and garden air drift through the new space like welcome guests. The place creaked in all the right ways, honest, lived in, unpretending. No one had ever walked these floors in heels meant to impress. No one had filmed a family dinner for likes. And that in itself was a gift. Ruby arrived 2 weeks later for spring break, suitcase in hand and face full of wonder. "You didn't tell me it was this beautiful," she said, stepping into the entryway and spinning slowly in a circle, taking in the soft light and pale blue wall. Elaine reached for her bag. Some things are better seen than described. They spent the week together without agenda, cooking late breakfasts in their pajamas, walking along the riverfront, sipping tea in matching mugs they bought at a corner shop down the block. On Thursday, Ruby pulled out her laptop to research internships. Elaine sat beside her, organizing old recipes into a new binder. It felt like a life earned, not just built. One afternoon, as the sun poured in through the balcony door, Ruby noticed something hanging near the hallway. She crossed the room and stood in front of it. A framed photo of the old house in Charlotte, taken from the street on a winter morning. The front porch wrapped in garland. The dining room windows glowing amber behind the frost. The dining table was just barely visible inside, empty but whole. Beneath the photo, on a small metal plaque, were 4 words etched in serif font, "Vacated with dignity." Ruby blinked. Elaine joined her, folding her arms loosely. "I had it printed the day after I closed," she said. "I wanted to remember it as it really was, not how they tried to stage it." Ruby looked at her, quiet. "I love that," she said finally. "It's not bitter. It's honest." Elaine didn't reply. She didn't need to. Just then, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Another email. She glanced at the preview. From a state attorney subject. "Trust finalization. Transfer draft ready." The sky over Savannah was pale and wide that morning, the kind that seemed to hold its breath before the day fully unfolded. Elaine sat at her kitchen table in her robe, the sun reaching across the floor in long, patient bands. The windows were cracked open just enough to let the sound of rustling leaves stir the silence, and her tea Earl Grey, with a touch of lemon, steeped beside her laptop. The document had arrived an hour earlier. Trust establishment and estate control. Final draft. Her name appeared at the top in bold, followed by the names of her financial accounts, the condo deed, 2 long-held investment portfolios, and a single designation that changed everything. Primary beneficiary and power of attorney. Ruby Ann Ward. Elaine read through every line slowly, meticulously, not because she doubted any of it, but because it deserved that kind of reverence. The pages didn't just name Ruby, they erased everyone else. Not out of spite, out of clarity. She opened a new tab, typed out a short cover letter, and attached it with the final signature page. Then she printed a hard copy of the letter on her stationery, the last sheet in a crisp cream stack, and sealed it in an envelope addressed to her lawyer in Charlotte. The handwritten message inside was only one line: execute if anything happens, they get nothing. She signed it the way Harold used to when something needed to be final. EMW later that afternoon, while the sun slipped quietly behind the trees, Elaine returned to the balcony with a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and a small bowl of almonds. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt still. The kind of stillness that comes not from winning, but from letting go of the weight you were never meant to carry in the first place. She didn't hear from Jessica anymore. Not since the voicemail weeks ago. But Tyler had sent one last email. A final breathless plea typed at 11:47 p.m. with too many commas, and no punctuation in the places that mattered. She's ruining us. Please, just talk to her. You don't know what it's like now. Elaine read the message from start to finish without reaction. She didn't delete it. She didn't archive it. She just closed the window and opened a new one, the grocery delivery site, to restock wine. That evening, Viola arrived. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a red scarf tied at her throat like she'd come from a cocktail party that hadn't actually happened. She brought a bottle of wine, a tin of salted pecans, and a folded article clipped from the Charlotte Ledger featuring a photo of Ruby, beside the words Youth Scholar of the Year. I figured you'd want 2 copies, Viola said, settling into the patio chair like it belonged to her. One for you, one for the safe. Elaine smiled. I already printed it, but thank you. They poured 2 glasses and toasted as the sky turned lavender. The wine was dry and bright, and the moment was so unburdened it almost felt like youth again. You look good here, Viola said, peering around the patio with approval. You belong here. Like the place waited for you to arrive. Elaine took another sip and stared out at the courtyard, where ivy crept gently up the brick walls like something that didn't need to be rushed. She whispered. Elaine said finally. I answered. Viola raised her glass. Amen. Inside, tucked away in a drawer beside the deed, was a new folder. Not thick, just decisive. Real property authorization. All assets to be directed, held, and released at the discretion of Ruby A. Ward, effective immediately. The photo found its way to Elaine by accident. She hadn't been looking for it, hadn't searched any names, hadn't checked any profiles, but Viola, ever the neighborhood watchdog, had forwarded her a screenshot in an email titled simply, You should see this. It was a picture from Jessica's new rental. A folding table sat crooked in the center of a bare linoleum kitchen. No cloth, no centerpiece, no wine glasses sparkling in filtered light. Just 2 mismatched chairs and an open takeout container on a brown paper bag. Tyler's knee was visible in the corner of the frame. Jessica was seated at the table, her posture slumped, phone in hand. No caption, just a timestamp, and then the unmistakable air of diminished volume. Elaine didn't zoom in. She didn't forward it. She looked at it once, let the quiet in it settle, and then closed the message. The condo was warm that morning. Sunlight flooded through the high windows, touching every surface as if on purpose. The hardwood glowed honey gold. The fern in the corner stretched gently toward the east light. No voices echoed off the walls. No apologies hung in the air waiting to be caught. Just a house finally matched to its owner. Ruby arrived later that afternoon, cheeks flushed pink from the wind, holding 2 birthday cupcakes in a paper bag, and a narrow flat envelope tucked beneath her arm. She kissed Elaine on the cheek before she even removed her coat. I brought cake, she said. The good kind. Real butter, real sugar. None of that Jessica-approved almond flour nonsense. Elaine laughed softly, gesturing toward the kitchen. Then it better be eaten warm. They unwrapped the cupcakes in the living room, setting them on small blue saucers, and sat cross-legged on the couch, like they used to during weekend sleepovers back when Ruby was 10. You look happy, Ruby said, brushing a crumb from her lap. I am, Elaine replied. Not with pride, but with something deeper. Happy and done. Ruby leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I saw the photo. Elaine raised an eyebrow. The folding table, Ruby clarified. Their place. It's barely even a home. Elaine didn't reply, but Ruby didn't need her to. I told someone today it wasn't karma. Ruby added. It's math. They borrowed everything, space, history, grace, and never made a single payment. Eventually, it came due. Elaine smiled at her granddaughter, the weight of lineage now lighter on her shoulders. That evening, she sat at her desk by the window with her legal file open. The final revision to her will had been sitting in draft for 3 weeks. Now, with no emotion other than precision, she signed the last page. The language was clear, unyielding. No contest clause, no ambiguity, no extensions for estranged parties. Ruby's name appeared in full again and again. Executor, sole heir, successor trustee, custodian of all real and intangible assets. Elaine sealed the updated copy in an envelope and slid it into her fireproof safe beside the deed. Outside, the courtyard was bathed in quiet. Lights flickered on in the other units, soft domestic glows behind curtains and blinds, but Elaine's remained open. She liked watching the night arrive slowly. The next morning, Viola appeared with a birthday balloon tied to her wrist and a tiny bundt cake from a boutique shop down the street. Sugar and flour still matter, she declared, especially when consumed with people who actually deserve your time. Elaine smiled and opened the door wider. Come in, Ruby's making tea. The 3 women gathered in the kitchen. Elaine with her soft cardigan sleeves rolled up, Ruby pouring water from a stovetop kettle, Viola adjusting the balloon so it wouldn't hit the overhead light. When the tea was poured and the cake sliced, Ruby held up her phone. One photo, she said. No filters, no captions. Elaine stood between them, one arm draped around Ruby's shoulder, the other around Viola's back. They looked straight at the lens, 3 generations framed by natural light and the faint scent of lemon and vanilla. The shutter clicked. Later, Ruby sent it to her with a short message. No table settings, just legacy. Elaine saved it without replying. In the photo, the birthday candle burned low, but no one reached to blow it out. The envelope was cream-colored, heavyweight, certified. No return address, but the postmark read Savannah, Georgia in a crisp red stamp. Jessica found it wedged awkwardly between a Realtor flyer and a grocery store coupon bundle in the rusted mailbox of their rental. She recognized the handwriting immediately, clean, upright, the kind you didn't forge or forget. She took it inside without speaking. The kitchen smelled faintly of burned toast and the kind of silence that follows a long argument no one won. Tyler was asleep on the couch, still in his jeans, his phone screen lighting up with low battery warnings. Jessica sliced the envelope open with a chipped nail and pulled out the contents. First, a glossy 4x6 photo. It was the front yard of their old home, the grass freshly trimmed, the porch spotless, and right in the center of the frame, a bold red and white sign planted at perfect angle. Sold behind the sign, the dining room window glowed softly, just enough to show the table set for someone else now. Beneath the photo was a stapled document, the full transfer history, title, sale record, trust designation, asset list, the date of the close, the name of the beneficiary, Ruby Ann Ward, and then the final item, a small yellow sticky note, placed with surgical intent, 4 words written in pen that didn't smudge. Not family, just owner. Jessica blinked once. Then again, no tears came. Not now, not anymore. She folded everything back into the envelope, set it on the counter beside a broken measuring cup, and stared at the floor as if a different answer might be hiding there. It wasn't. In Savannah, the afternoon moved slowly, as it always did, soft sun filtering through gauzy curtains, the smell of baked rosemary and lemon drifting from the oven. Elaine stood at her front door, turning the key with quiet intention. The lock clicked shut behind her. The sound wasn't angry, it was whole. Inside, the condo was immaculate, but not staged, lived in. The kind of space that bore no pretense, only preference. A stack of library books on the coffee table, a knitted throw draped over the armchair, tea cooling near the window, untouched but not forgotten. On the kitchen table sat a new bouquet, white tulips, tied with twine. Ruby had left them earlier that morning, after brunch. She'd brewed the coffee, cleared the plates, and placed the flowers in the same ceramic vase they'd chosen together back in March. Their table now, not inherited, built, above the sink, mounted where the light caught it in the afternoon, was a small bronze plaque. Nothing fancy, just engraved lettering, slightly weather-worn already. Respect is served daily. Elaine ran her fingers across it once, then stepped away. In the living room, a framed photo rested on the mantel, the birthday picture. 3 women, 3 generations, no candles blown out, just light that stayed. She stood still for a moment, letting it settle. The moment, the quiet, the full completion of what had begun, not with shouting, but with a whisper. She moved to her desk and opened the window slightly, just enough to let in the breeze from the trees swaying beyond the courtyard. Her eyes drifted toward the folder marked Legacy, still tucked away in the drawer. It wouldn't be opened again. It didn't need to be. Everything in it had already been given, and outside, far beyond what used to be a house, and was now just coordinates on someone else's map, the world continued. But inside that condo, in the soft hush of a room filled with earned peace, Elaine smiled. She whispered once, "I answered forever."